Between superpowers, the rise and relevance of the non-aligned movement. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will reflect on the non-aligned movement, not simply as a historical grouping, but as an idea shaped by moments of global division and strategic uncertainty. The war in Ukraine, ongoing tensions between Russia and NATO, and the strategic rivalry between the United States and China across trade, technology, and global influence have become defining features of today's geopolitical landscape. As a result, many countries face growing pressure to take sides, to signal alignment, or to commit within an increasingly polarized international system. At the same time, we are entering a more multipolar world where power is distributed across several actors. Many states, often described as the world majority, seek autonomy and flexibility, engaging different partners without exclusive alignment. This is also reflected in diverse diplomatic platforms, including groupings such as BRICS. This challenge, however, is not new. After the Second World War, global politics hardened into opposing blocs. For newly independent nations, the fear was not only war, but becoming the next battlefield. What happens when global politics leaves little room for neutrality? To answer that question, we must revisit the non-aligned movement, because its core idea of strategic autonomy continues to shape how many states navigate today's multipolar world. Chapter 1: The birth of non-alignment in a divided world. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the global map was undergoing a historic transformation. Across Asia and Africa, empires that had dominated for generations were collapsing. One by one, new states emerged from colonial rule: India, Indonesia, Egypt, Ghana, and many others, claiming political independence for the first time. But independence arrived in a world already divided. As the Cold War intensified, global politics hardened into a bipolar structure. On one side stood the United States and its allies, promoting liberal capitalism and collective security. On the other stood the Soviet Union and its partners, advancing Marxist-Leninist socialism and revolutionary internationalism. Military alliances expanded, ideological boundaries sharpened, and global influence became a zero-sum contest. For newly independent nations, this presented a profound dilemma. Having just escaped colonial domination, many leaders feared that alignment with either bloc could lead to a new form of dependence: political, military, or economic. The concern was not only about ideology, but about sovereignty itself. It was within this context that a different vision began to take shape. In 1955, leaders from 29 Asian and African countries gathered in Bandung, Indonesia, at the invitation of President Sukarno. The Bandung Conference was not a military summit nor a formal alliance. Instead, it was a declaration of intent. Its participants affirmed principles of anti-colonialism, respect for sovereignty, non-interference, and peaceful coexistence. Bandung marked a turning point. For the first time, newly independent states collectively asserted that global politics did not have to be defined solely by the rivalry of great powers. This emerging vision was soon championed by a group of influential leaders. Jawaharlal Nehru of India articulated the philosophical foundations of non-alignment. Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt emphasized strategic autonomy amid regional pressure. Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana linked political independence with economic self-determination. And Josip Broz Tito of Yugoslavia, though not from Asia or Africa, brought a critical European perspective, having pursued an independent path outside Soviet control. Together, these leaders argued that non-alignment was not neutrality, passivity, or isolation. It was an active stance, one that sought engagement with all, subordination to none. This idea was formally institutionalized in 1961 when representatives from 25 countries met in Belgrade to establish the non-aligned movement. The founding declaration emphasized independence, opposition to imperialism, and the right of each nation to determine its own political and economic path. By the early 1960s, non-alignment had become more than a concept. It was a collective political identity, born from decolonization, shaped by Cold War realities, and grounded in a shared desire for autonomy in a divided world. Yet, Yet one essential question remained unanswered. What did non-alignment truly mean in practice? And how was it different from simply standing aside? To answer that, we must now look more closely at the principles behind the idea itself. Chapter 2. What non-alignment really means. At first glance, non-alignment may sound like a simple idea, refusing to take sides. But in global politics, non-alignment was never about standing still. From its earliest advocates, the non-aligned movement was conceived not as neutrality in the traditional sense, but as strategic autonomy, the freedom to make independent decisions without being bound to any military alliance or ideological bloc. Leaders such as Jawaharlal Nehru were careful to clarify this distinction. Non-alignment did not mean isolation from world affairs, nor disengagement from global responsibilities. On the contrary, it meant active participation in international politics guided by national interest rather than external pressure. In practical terms, non-aligned states reserved the right to cooperate with multiple powers at once. They could trade with one bloc, accept aid from another, and criticize both when necessary. What they rejected was permanent alignment, especially when such alignment risked compromising sovereignty or dragging their nations into conflicts not of their choosing. This principle was reflected in the core values articulated at Bandung and later formalized in Belgrade: respect for territorial integrity, non-interference in domestic affairs, peaceful coexistence, and opposition to all forms of imperialism, old and new. Importantly, non-alignment was also shaped by historical memory. Many of its members had experienced colonial rule, economic exploitation, and foreign intervention. For them, the Cold War was not merely a contest of ideas, it was a potential repetition of external domination under a different name. Yet non-alignment was never a rigid doctrine. It allowed for diversity. Some non-aligned countries leaned economically toward the West. Others maintained close political ties with socialist states. What united them was not uniform behavior, but a shared insistence on choice. This flexibility became both the movement's greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. Because if non-alignment allowed engagement with all sides, it also raised a difficult question. How long could countries remain truly non-aligned in a world that constantly demanded loyalty? That question would soon move from theory into reality, under pressure, conflict, and great power rivalry. And that is where our journey takes us next. Chapter 3. Between Ideals and Reality, Non-Alignment in Practice. As the non-aligned movement gained visibility on the global stage, its ideals were soon tested by the realities of Cold War power politics. The world in which non-alignment was born was not neutral, and neither were the interests of the superpowers. From the perspective of the United States, non-alignment often appeared ambiguous. In Washington, neutrality was sometimes interpreted as hesitation, or even as a potential opening for communist influence. American policymakers, shaped by the logic of containment, tended to view global politics as a competitive arena where influence gained by one side was perceived as influence lost by the other. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, publicly supported anti-colonial movements and frequently aligned itself with states opposing Western imperialism. Yet, Moscow was equally cautious of leaders who insisted on political independence from all power blocs. Non-aligned countries that refused ideological commitment challenged the Soviet Union's claim to represent a unified global socialist front. As a result, many non-aligned states found themselves under pressure from both sides, politically, economically, and strategically. This pressure became especially visible in regions where Cold War rivalries turned into proxy conflicts. In Southeast Asia, wars such as Vietnam demonstrated how local struggles were drawn into superpower competition. In parts of the Middle East, countries like Egypt navigated shifting alignments amid regional conflicts and external influence. For many non-aligned nations, maintaining independence was not simply a matter of declaration, but of constant negotiation. Economic dependence added another layer of complexity. Many non-aligned countries required foreign aid, development loans, or military assistance to stabilize their economies and secure their borders. Accepting such support could strengthen national capacity, but it also risked political leverage, conditionality, and long-term dependency. Internal divisions further tested the movement. The non-aligned movement was never ideologically uniform. Member states differed in political systems, economic models, security priorities, and regional concerns. Some leaned economically toward Western markets, others maintained close relations with socialist states, and several adjusted their positions over time in response to domestic and regional pressures. Yet despite these contradictions, the movement endured. Non-alignment proved to be less about perfect neutrality and more about strategic flexibility. It offered smaller and middle powers a framework to resist domination, manage external pressure, and assert agency within a polarized international system, even when circumstances made that balance difficult to sustain. When the Cold War eventually came to an end, the bipolar world that gave rise to non-alignment disappeared. But the underlying dilemma did not. Instead, it evolved. As new power centers emerged and global competition took on different forms, a familiar question returned, this time in a different global landscape. In a world no longer defined by two superpowers, does non-alignment still matter? Chapter 4: The Relevance of the Non-Aligned Movement in a Multipolar World. When the Cold War ended, many assumed that the non-aligned movement had lost its purpose. The bipolar rivalry that gave birth to non-alignment seemed to disappear, replaced by a brief period of unipolar dominance and expanding globalization. Yet history did not end. In the decades that followed, the international system gradually evolved toward a multipolar and fragmented order. Power became more dispersed. New economic centers emerged. Strategic competition returned, no longer confined to ideology alone, but extending across trade, technology, security, and influence. Today's geopolitical landscape reflects this shift. The war in Ukraine has reshaped relations between Russia, NATO, and Europe, reinforcing security blocs while exposing the limits of consensus. At the same time, strategic rivalry between the United States and China increasingly shapes global supply chains, technological standards, and diplomatic alignments. In this environment, many countries once again face familiar pressures, not necessarily to choose an ideology, but to align strategically. And once again, many resist. Rather than formally declaring themselves non-aligned, states today often practice what might be called strategic hedging. They engage multiple powers simultaneously, diversify partnerships, and avoid exclusive commitments that could constrain their autonomy. This behavior closely echoes the original spirit of non-alignment, even if the language has evolved. Groupings such as BRICS illustrate this shift. While not a military alliance or a continuation of the non-aligned movement, BRICS reflects a shared desire among emerging powers to increase strategic space, reform global governance, and reduce overdependence on any single center of power. Its relevance lies not in uniform ideology, but in the assertion of agency within a competitive global system. For many countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and beyond, often described today as the global majority, the priority remains familiar: preserving sovereignty, promoting development, and avoiding entanglement in great power confrontation. In this sense, non-alignment has not disappeared. It has adapted. The movement's original principles, strategic autonomy, diplomatic flexibility, and resistance to domination, continue to inform how states navigate an increasingly complex international order. The challenge today is not choosing between two blocks, but managing relationships in a world of many competing powers. Which brings us to a final reflection. In a world where alignment carries costs and independence requires balance, is non-alignment not a relic of the past, but a strategy for the future? Closing. Reflections on independence in global politics. The story of the non-aligned movement is ultimately a story about choice. Not the choice between rival powers, but the choice to preserve sovereignty, dignity, and independent judgment in a divided world. From the Cold War to today's increasingly multipolar international system, non-alignment has never been about isolation. It has been about balance, flexibility, and the refusal to become merely an arena for other powers' ambitions. As global rivalries continue to evolve, the questions faced by non-aligned nations remain strikingly familiar and deeply relevant. Thank you for watching. See you next time.